Hi there chickens. Over my time on this YouTube expedition that I've been on, I have become known as a shadow worker, and principally as somebody who loves to talk about shadow work and teach shadow work. And certainly I do teach shadow work with my clients one-on-one, and I go through shadow work with them in my Illuminate sessions and also in my spiritual counselling sessions. It comes up in my tarot readings and stuff like that. And I feel so fortunate to have shaped my personal kind of career path, if you like, in this way, because I'm obsessed with shadow work. I'm a real nerd when it comes to shadow work in particular. I think it's a really important part of my own psycho-spiritual development. It's something that I've really armed myself with. I've armed myself with the knowledge of shadow work in order to forge forward on my own life journey and really connect with the true essence of what it means to be me. I feel so much more empowered and so much more authentic when I practice shadow work and when I live in the truth of what shadow work is really all about. This particular video that you're watching now is going to be entered into my shadow work playlist, and if you are watching this and you're kind of confused as to what shadow work is and what I'm talking about, please do refer to the playlist. You will find some very helpful, or I hope anyway, helpful videos to help you understand more about what shadow work is and get a decent starting point. But I'll leave 2 or 3 of the key videos below for your convenience, although of course a quick Google search will definitely help you if you are keen on brevity and you don't like how many words I use to get my point across. Some people are not attracted to that in me, and that's fair enough, you know, not everybody likes that. In this video I'm going to address a few things about shadow work that have come up in my private Facebook group, a few things that have come up in my discussions with people, things that I'm asked, things that people email me about that I thought might be good to clear up, and there probably will be a few videos of this nature. So the first thing that I want to do to kick things off is talk about the art of personifying your shadows or your shards of shadow, personifying your complexes, personifying your neuroses, personifying your dilemmas, etc. This is a very popular thing that people do in shadow work, and I have been asked quite a few times whether or not it's actually healthy to do this. And I've also been told on a few occasions that there are certain people that have therapists that don't necessarily advise that they do this. There are certain people who believe that it is unhealthy to do this. And I would like to speak on that because I am somebody that is quite keen on personifying complexes. I'm quite keen on using the idea of archetypes to actually help us to identify different parts of ourselves and understand what's going on in the psyche when we're actually operating as we go through life. So I'm going to give you an example of a personified complex for me in my personal life, a little part of me that I have personified, that I've made into a little character, if you will. Some of you who remember my shadow work by the seaside video that I did last year will remember Dizzy McWoo-Woo, and Dizzy McWoo-Woo is the little part of me that is kind of like, I guess she is the shadow of my inner child, okay? She is the little stubborn, recalcitrant part of me that doesn't want to grow up and doesn't really want to deal with the complexities of consensus reality. Dizzy McWoo-Woo is the part of me that wants to hide under the covers, that doesn't want to have to deal with bills or money, that doesn't want to have to kind of get her head straight and do big grown-up things. I've personified this part of me, so I've given this part of me a name so that I can really see when she's in the driver's seat. Now, I know that Dizzy McWoo-Woo is a part of me, and she's a part of me that I have to take responsibility for. Dizzy McWoo-Woo is not some separate entity that comes into my life and messes things up for me at the drop of a hat. Dizzy McWoo-Woo is a part of my psyche, and I have ultimate accountability for making sure that that part of my psyche doesn't take over and start writing the narrative for me. However, the thing that I like about personifying this part of me is that it makes it easier to identify when that part of me actually shows up, rather than thinking about a loose collection of behaviours and energies that tend to come along and identifying them but kind of trying to grasp them all out of the air and, you know, being like, oh, I see that I'm doing this thing again that I do, but, you know, there's no clear name for it. Rather than doing that, I like to just have a name for it so that when I notice myself beginning to behave in that way, it's really easy to grasp the name immediately and go, oh, you know what, I am being really Dizzy McWoo-Woo right now. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly how it's going to go if I don't take control of it. So for me, it makes it cognitively easier to actually grab onto the name that I've given to this little complex that I have in my psyche. And the other reason that I like to personify my complexes, or my shadows if you like, is because it's humorous, it's playful, and shadow work can be pretty heavy, you know, it can be pretty fucking intense. Often it doesn't feel very playful, often it doesn't feel very funny, but I think humour can be a great tool I really enjoy humour. I think there can be a lot of power in humour when we're doing something like shadow work. So for me, when I personify my complexes and my neuroses and my dilemmas and my fears, I'm actually bringing a cute little sense of playfulness to the proceedings. And that's not to say that shadow work isn't difficult and it isn't heavy and it shouldn't be intense. And I've talked about that in my shadow work real talk video, which I'll also leave below for you. I've talked about the fact that I do not think shadow work is a plate of fucking jelly and ice cream. And if you think it is, then you might be doing it wrong. It's supposed to be heavy, okay? It's fucking heavy work. But I do think, you know, it doesn't hurt to make it a bit playful. It doesn't hurt to see the humour in some of our complexes and some of our dilemmas and some of our different funny ways of seeing things. And when we recognise that we have certain problems that we keep coming up against, certain obstacles that we're trying to get through, I don't think it hurts to laugh about them. I really don't. I think it gives us the power when we laugh about them and when we bring humour into the proceedings. So for me, personifying shards of shadow, or personifying complexes if you like, is actually a really useful thing to do on the shadow work journey. And I would love to know below how many of you are actually personifying your complexes, how many of you have little names for certain parts of your psyche that tend to cause problems. I know some people have a rebellious teenage punk inside of them. Some people have a stroppy kind of stubborn old lady inside of them. You know, some people have a rebel without a cause archetype inside of them that causes trouble. And I think it's really cool sometimes to identify these parts. I know that I have a moody, kind of really, I guess not a histrionic goth, but like just a really dark goth inside of me. And you know, sometimes I don't think it hurts to laugh at that part of me and go, oh, for God's sake, Kellyanne, come on, you're letting that moody goth take over, you know, lighten up. I think it's cool to see the different parts of you that are at work, and I don't think naming them means that you're saying that you are other to them. I still realise that it's completely my own responsibility to take control of those little bits of my psyche, but I think it's cute to name them, and I think it's easier to name them. I think it's really cool to look at it like that. I know to some people it might seem a little bit like a split personality situation. It might seem very unhealthy to certain people to actually name different parts of your psyche, but I want to assure you that it doesn't mean in any way that I'm saying that these parts of me actually are not me. I'm not saying that there's some alien bit of me that isn't really to do with Kellyanne Maddox. All these little bits of me are me, but it's really much more useful to me to have those labels so I can actually be in the driver's seat and see when a certain part of me has taken over and is actually writing the story, you know? So for me, it's helpful, and for me, it's healthy. It may not necessarily be that way for you. One thing that I feel is often overlooked when people talk about shadow work is the value of the transpersonal aspect of the work. So a lot of people, when they look at their shadowscape, they're looking at their insecurities and their fears, they're looking at their bad behaviours, their off-colour ways of being, and they're looking at actually pulling those things up and confronting them and working to understand them and working to no longer allow them to have control, but actually to integrate them into your understanding of self. And that's great, that's good, healthy, personal shadow work. But what transpersonal shadow work is, and this is also a very important part of the work, is when we actually look at things like mythopoetic structures. So we look at things like fairy tales, folk tales, mythology, different gods and goddesses in different pantheons. We might look at pop culture. We might look at the way stories are set up. We might look at different archetypes and different characters within stories or within plays, that kind of thing. And we actually identify our personal shadow content to these bigger, more overarching transpersonal narratives. That is really important, and I think that is missing a lot these days with modern shadow work, with the dialogue around modern shadow work. I think that Jungian aspect is missing. And I kind of want to really just stress to people that the transpersonal aspect of the work is important. I did a video a while ago called My Goddess Superstars, and in that video I talked about a lot of the goddesses that have been really influential for me, the goddesses that have had an important effect on my life, etc. And one of the things I mentioned in that video was that Athena was a big source of inspiration for me when it came to my transpersonal shadow work, the transpersonal layer of my shadow work. I've been connected to Athena since I was a small child. I'm really interested in her as a goddess. I feel very drawn to her energy. But as I got older and I really started to fully appreciate her mythos and her stories, it occurred to me that there's actually quite a big correlation between her and me in terms of a lot of the shadow stuff I was working through. I felt like Medusa was Athena's shadow. And I also felt like Athena was a symbol of my connection to my father and how that became toxic because I kind of allowed him to raise me in his image. And the fact that Athena sprung out of Zeus's head very much suggested that she was of her father rather than being of herself. And I felt like a lot of the ways that Athena is, like the fact that she's very concerned with wisdom and knowledge and strategy and all that kind of thing, was very much what I was trying to project forward in order to win approval from my father and seek that acceptance from my father. So as I was doing my shadow work around my relationship with my dad and all of that kind of thing, it really struck me that Athena is quite a good transpersonal symbol of a lot of the shit that I was going through in my shadow work and a lot of the things that I was unearthing about myself and my shadowscape. And that was really interesting to me. And that's happened to me quite a lot with other goddesses as well. And it's really been interesting, like my matron deity, for example. I see a lot of correlation between her and her siblings and me and my siblings, and her and her father, who's Loki, and me and my father. And it was just really fucking interesting. Like a lot of it was really interesting. I felt like hell was actually an interesting representation of quite a lot of things about me, and some of those things were things that I needed to accept and explore more, that I'd actually suppressed into shadow. And it was almost as though I chose hell as a way to bring those shadowy parts of me into consciousness more and accept them more. So this is what I mean by the transpersonal stage of shadow work, and it's really important, and I really urge you and encourage you, if you're on a journey of personal shadow work, to take it to that transpersonal level. It is so enhancing. It's so life affirming. It's really, really interesting. If you're not really that interested in mythology and you're not really that kind of up on gods and goddesses, you can definitely use other kinds of stories. You know, if you're interested in Harry Potter, use the characters in Harry Potter and the situations in Harry Potter to connect with some of the things in your shadowscape, you know, which figures and which scenarios could describe for you some of the things that you have found in your shadow. You could use any pantheon from any modern day Netflix show, you know, anything like that is available to you, anything like that is on offer. You don't have to use like typical traditional mythopoetic frameworks. You can use anything. You can use Star Trek, you know. I've encouraged people several times on the channel to use Star Trek if they want to, but really just look, you know, at those transpersonal structures and use them in your shadow work. I really like to use Star Trek because I think that the Vulcan in me is in shadow, and I think the Klingon in me can sometimes be almost like too extremely conscious. So I think that's really interesting, looking at the different personality types and the different values and principles that come with each of these different races in Star Trek, and how they represent different personality types, and how I can use that in my shadow work. So you can really be playful with it. It doesn't have to be super serious. It doesn't have to be super ethereal. But yeah, the transpersonal aspect of shadow work I feel is often missing, and I think that's really where you can make a meal of it. But of course that is a very Jungian thing to say, but that for me is where a lot of the magic is, you know, a lot of the stories, a lot of the you know, just spiritual stories from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Upanishads, stories of the life of the Buddha, fairy tales, folk stories, just learning about that kind of thing and thinking about how it relates to shadow work and how it relates to those murkier and less accessible parts of my own consciousness and my own being. That's just really interesting to me, and maybe that can be inspiring and interesting to you too. I want to talk briefly about the importance of ritual and ceremony in shadow work, in relation to shadow work. Again, this is very much me coming from my own perspective, and I always seek not to be dogmatic when I am explaining anything. I don't want anybody that watches my videos to go away and think that what I have to say is the be-all and end-all of everything. Like, people are so different and everybody needs to find their own way, and I'm completely comfortable with that. I do not want to be anyone's shadow work guru. I'm just a girl that is really nerdy and geeky about shadow work and likes to talk about shadow work, and that's it. So if this doesn't float your particular boat, totally fine, you know, I'm not going to be offended. But for me, ritual and ceremony are very much an important way to represent that I have recognised something in my shadow work and I have come to some kind of a conclusion. Something has been meted out in my shadow work and I have learned as a result. For me, I feel as though ritual is a way of putting a full stop on something. If I've been on a journey of any kind, if I've really unraveled something and I've come to an understanding of something in my consciousness, ritual or ceremony is a way to just pop that full stop on the end and say, yes, I've reached a point at which there is some clarity, or I've reached a point at which there is a conclusion, or I've reached a point of evolution in this. I've reached a point of necessary recognition that something has changed or something has become conscious. So if you're doing shadow work and you're finding that you're not really using the art of ritual and ceremony, you might want to think about how those things actually create a bridge very much between the internal world and the external world. They create a bridge between the unconscious and the tangible or physical. They help to show you that what you have learned is really of consequence, and what you have experienced on the internal can now be effectual on the external, in your external life, in your dealings with others, etc. Ritual and ceremony do not have to be flowery. They don't have to be, really artfully self-conscious. They don't have to be really opulent, They can be really, really simple. They can be totally straightforward. It can just be a case of lighting a candle and saying a few words of power. It can be a case of getting your cauldron out if you have one, or getting yourself to an open fire, or making a fire outside and just lighting some paper that has some words on it, and just kind of like experiencing a feeling of release, opening up to the lesson, recognizing that you have learned something, you have imbibed something, you have ingested something, an understanding of some kind or a realization of some kind. It can be anything really, rituals can be so simplistic and still be so meaningful and so potent. It's up to you. Some people love to be very ceremonial and very flowery and over the top. They like to script things, they like to plan things out, and other people just like to be spontaneous and keep it very, very simple. It's up to you. It's up to the individual. There is no wrong or right way to incorporate ritual or ceremony into anything. But I think particularly with shadow work, ritual and ceremony can be another very underrated part of the process. It can be so useful to incorporate ritual into your shadow work. When you have realized something in your shadow work, when you have hit a point of recognition, when you've come to a piece of material in the shadow that's made you cry or made you open up to a deeper understanding of yourself, it really helps to just have that little time of ceremony where you recognise that something has really been done. And for some people, it's just going to be about journaling. For me, I do like to do some journaling when I've come upon some really interesting content or some really powerful material in my shadow work. But I also do like to do something a little bit more ceremonial. I like to go to my altar and I like to make a little bit of a meal of it. And to me, that is a representation. Like I said, it's that bridge for me between what's happened on the internal and actually confirming that in the external. And that's just something that I really love to do. It might flick your switch, it might not necessarily, but I thought I would mention it. Finally, I just want to say a few words on the art of understanding when to continue down a certain road with your shadow work and when to kind of like let go or give up, or at least put the brakes on for a little while. Now, I have often said in my shadow work videos and in the resources that I put out to people that I don't always think it's the best idea to continue down a certain avenue with shadow work if you're not feeling safe, if you're not feeling comfortable. But then people have come to me and said, well, what about if I'm really hitting on something, but it is starting to feel uncomfortable? And what about if I'm backing away and I'm using my discomfort as an excuse not to forge forward? And you know what? The only thing that I can say to that is that you need to drop into your heart and ask yourself if you are using it as an excuse or not. Nobody else can really tell you that. Now, I do work one-on-one with clients on shadow stuff. It does come up regularly in the spiritual counselling sessions that I do, and I do actually offer an 8-week Illuminate shadow work one-on-one kind of mentoring option, which you can check out below. I'll leave you the details for that below. So I do actually work with people on shadow stuff, and together in a one-on-one situation, we can try to determine whether or not it's a good idea to forge forward with a particularly difficult piece of shadow work content, or whether it's time to step back. But the thing is, because I'm working one-on-one with a person on that, I've got a lot more context to work with, I know a lot more about the person. I know a lot more about their situation. So my opinion holds a lot more stock. I cannot give you the benefit of my informed opinion when you are just a random person that's doing some shadow work and I don't know anything about your situation and we've never worked together. I can't help you with that. It's easy for me to have an opinion on what my clients are doing because I'm working with them actively and we are kind of moving along with it together, and I'm in that mentoring position. But I wouldn't be able to say with zero context whatsoever whether or not you should continue with a line of inquiry in your shadow work if you're starting to feel uncomfortable. What I will say is that most people, when they really question themselves, do actually know whether or not they ought to be continuing with a line of inquiry or not. There are some telltale signs, you know, there are certain things that you can look for. For example, if it's really starting to stress you out and you're starting to become obsessed with it, you're starting to fixate over it, it's starting to mess with things, you know, maybe you're going off into a daze and thinking about that while you're supposed to be listening to somebody or doing your job, you know, maybe it's messing with your biorhythms, you know, that kind of thing. That's where it's really started to get out of hand and you need to pull back. If it's giving you lots of nightmares, if you're waking up with cold sweats, that kind of thing. When you are doing shadow work and you're really delving into something from your past, you're delving into a phobia, you're delving into bad memories and that kind of thing, I think deep down you know when it has become fundamentally unsafe for you. And I think a lot of people try to push themselves beyond that barrier too quickly. Usually because they're ambitious about their shadow work, you know, they really want to get shit done, they want to hit on things. I think a lot of people that come to the idea of shadow work, they're really passionate about personal development. They're passionate about doing the work on self, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a fucking beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing, believe me. I'd be a very different woman right now sitting here at the age of 32 if my mother hadn't have been passionate about doing her work after her mother died. My mum delved the fuck in. She knew she had shit to sort out, you know, and that's a big part of the reason why I am how I am now, because I had access to that in real time, you know, watching somebody doing the work. And I'm not going to say my mother made me who I am right now, and she would always hate me to say anything like that. But definitely witnessing somebody realising they had shit to sort out and watching them actually go through it in real time, you know, sitting in the front row and like watching it, that was very influential for me. So there's nothing wrong with being ambitious and passionate about doing your work, getting better, healing, evolving, moving forward with your life. But I think if we are too rigid with our ambition, we try to push ourselves, you know, so far, so fast. And there's no need, you've got time, okay? So if you need to take your foot off the gas, take your foot off the fucking gas, all right? Nobody's timing you. Nobody's going to give you a test at the end of the month or the end of the year and say, you know, let's have a look how much shadow work you managed this year or whatever. You're not being tested, you know? You can go at your own pace, and if you do feel like something has become fundamentally unsafe, take your foot off the gas, approach it in a different way or at a different time or just a little bit more slowly. If there's anybody around you that you trust, that you can open up to, that you can talk to about your experiences with delving into some complex shadow material, then do so. If you're really serious about shadow work and you really want to make a go of it and you feel like it's going to be a very pertinent part of your self-development and you have money to invest, you know, go ahead and find yourself a mentor, find yourself a good therapist, work with a counsellor one-on-one and let them shepherd you and help you and hold the space for you when it comes to those particularly difficult parts of shadow work content, you know? So essentially what I'm saying is, you know, there are ways of knowing when you've taken it too far, and it's okay to take your foot off the gas and slow down and just back up a little bit. I've done it. I've definitely done it. I've started to hit on things in shadow and it's just been a little bit overwhelming, you know. I've had a lot of other shit on my plate and I've just kind of thought, you know what, I'm delving in very deeply with something that I could stand to take a little bit more slowly. Let me just back off on this a little bit because I'm finding it just a little bit too stressful. There's no shame in recognising that you are finding something a little bit too rich for your blood in shadow work, and it might be good to just take it at a slower pace. You know, like I said, you're not being tested, nobody's going to judge you for that at all. So I hope that these thoughts have been useful, and I hope that they've served you on your shadow work journey. If you are currently engaged in a shadow work process, then I honour that. You know, I think that's really fucking cool. Do the work, give yourself to the work, and it will pay off, you know. You will get a lot of return on that investment. I know that I certainly have. And there'll be more videos coming. I'm going to do a video on using tarot with shadow work or oracle with shadow work, so that's going to be coming up. A few more sort of chatty shadow work videos are coming as well. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you have too. Much love, guys. Blessed be.